Welcome to the Core Coaches Corner, where we take a principle from one of the 7 core healthy and happy habits and discuss it through a core lens. And today, Sharla and I are talking about promoting sexual intimacy, or we're going to talk about promoting emotional intimacy through, what are we talking about, Sharla?
Today we're going to talk about gender differences and sexual intimacy, like you were saying, and connection there, and
Okay.
just the importance of it in relationships, because it is a huge variable.
It's a huge variable. And so what I was trying to say is that this module is promoting emotional connection through sexual intimacy. And
Yes.
one of the things that is really important in there is understanding some of the gender differences. And this is actually the 7th principle or habit in the core healthy and happy roadmap. And the reason why this is the seventh principle, the 7th variable, is because as you have worked to incorporate the other 6 habits into your life, it really sets the stage. Sexual intimacy can be pretty tricky for couples, and is an area of life that a lot of couples really struggle with. And so learning how to manage it well and being able to run it well is it can feel, to a lot of people, feels like some sort of crapshoot magical equation with it, when the stars happen to align, kind of a thing. And part of what we want you to understand is that it doesn't have to be that way. That this is a really important part of healthy relationships, and that it doesn't have to feel like it's some sort of elusive magical equation that you have to figure out, but that there are actual things that are pretty predictably help this area of life go well. So, thoughts?
Yeah. Just that I think you said a lot there. I think that the sexuality piece can be so troubling for so many, and it's sad because it really can be such an area of strength and an area of closeness. But there's as you mentioned, a deliberate reason we put it at the end of our modules, because all of the previous modules, all of those things come into play with how sexuality shows up in the relationship, and why or why not it may be going well or otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you can make this conversation go on and on. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to sort of segment it and be like, well, it could be all, you kind of tend to be able to pull all the little pieces in, and it can be a lot. But yeah, today I think we wanted to mention just a couple of key differences between men and women. And obviously hormones is a big one. And like, I mean, I'll throw out there too that right now, especially with the political climate and the way that our culture is running, like it's really difficult for some people to have conversations about gender in terms of the binary male versus female. But that's basically where we're going to start today and kind of focus, because there are some key differences there. When you look at the hormones of a male, they do tend to have higher testosterone. And of course, there are females that also have higher testosterone levels. And that leads to a higher sex drive. And I feel like that's fairly common knowledge. But sometimes it's helpful to remind people, because if it's common knowledge, you might just be like, oh, whatever. But it really does play a role.
It absolutely does. And one of the things that is really important in understanding gender differences, and again, we're speaking about generalities. There are obviously individual differences in these things, but there are also generalities. And in general, one of the differences between men and women is that men tend to feel close to their spouses or their partners as a result of sexual intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And women tend to want to have sexual intimacy as a result of feeling close and connected to their spouse or their partner.
Right.
And so there's a fundamental difference right there. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I just think that it's a cycle that repeats itself, and it can get on a positive spin or it can get on a negative spin. Whichever way the relationship tends to be going, it tends to self-perpetuate. So if you have a relationship where you are working on areas of intimacy, that because obviously there's many places where you can be intimate in your relationships. Like sexual intimacy is just one of many. So like emotional connection, physical connection, social connection, spiritual connection, like they you can go on. But when you have relationship intimacy on those levels, it tends to play really nicely into sexual intimacy also. And when you've got a woman who feels close and connected in those ways, she's going to tend to feel more open to being sexual and vulnerable in that way and giving in that way. And that will kind of create more closeness in the man. And then he'll want to be softer and sweeter, and she'll be there for her and connecting in the ways that she needs. And then she'll keep that cycle going by being more responsive when he wants to have sex and those kind of things. And the women sometimes are higher desire partners too. So I don't want to play it out like it's only men who hire.
In generalities, right?
Right. Right. But when you get that going the opposite direction, it's really bad because it does keep going that way. So they don't feel close and connected. There's not really a lot of vulnerability and connection and intimacy happening in various areas. And so there's not a real desire to have sex. And the woman doesn't really want to be close in that way. And then the man's not getting it, and he's not feeling like being sweet and responsive to her and wanting to connect to her emotional needs. So it kind of perpetuates the opposite direction.
This is one area where momentum is really important, because like you said, you can see the divinity in how well it supports both the man and the woman in this.
Totally.
When it's working well and you're having sex and he feels connected and then he's more attentive and in tune with what's going on, and then she feels more connected and wants to have more sex, and it just or continue to have sex, and it just really it really tends to perpetuate positive momentum, or totally repel in the opposite direction.
Right.
You're not having sex, he feels disconnected, he's less in tune, he's less sensitive, he's less plugged in, which makes her feel more disconnected. When she feels disconnected, right, the last thing she wants to do is to engage in sexual intimacy, and it just totally goes in the opposite direction. And you hit another thing that I think is really important that I'd like to just mention, which is I really don't like it when people talk about sexual intimacy as intimacy, as if that's the only area of intimacy in a relationship. And I think that really does a disservice to all of the areas of intimacy. And the fact is that a couple can get in a situation where they're relying too heavily on sexual intimacy for the intimacy and connection in their relationship. And you can also get on the other side where a couple is not relying enough on the connective power of sexual intimacy to create the emotional connection that both crave and want. And so you really have to be thinking about the various levels of or areas of intimacy that you talked about, and making sure that you're nurturing the emotional connection and the social connection and the physical connection and the spiritual connection and the financial connection, all of those different psychological connection, all those different areas of intimacy. And interestingly, the research shows that that couples who report having sex 1 to 2 times a week report the highest levels of relationship satisfaction. And so that frequency is important. If you're having sex more frequently than that, a lot of times it's an indicator that you're not relying on the other areas of intimacy,
not nurturing and building them enough.
Right. And if you're having sex less frequently than 1 to 2 times a week, then you're not relying enough on the connective power. There's so much inherent vulnerability. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's so much just advantage that comes from being close physically. and intimate sexually, you get a lot of chemicals that come in and really help bond you together. And the wiring that happens is it's teaching you to trust and to put that closeness into the other person.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
you don't want to miss out on the opportunities that are there if you're not getting it enough.
You don't, and we'll be exploring a little bit more too as we move through these coaches conversations around sexual intimacy, exploring even the issue of gender differences a little bit more. But it is important to understand that your partner doesn't necessarily function the way that you do, and
Mhm.
and it's important to understand.
And not just for gender, like obviously our whole spiel is about core, like so personality and temperament, that's huge, right? And as a quick caveat, um, see males as a as a group tend to need that emotional closeness more than the other temperaments. So that's a gender difference too, but also ties really nicely into what we teach in terms of core. So anyway, I just thought I'd put a plug in right there.
Absolutely, and see males, see men, not seamen, but see men. Um,
Yo ho.
yeah, um, very much do function in terms of the connection first, and then sexual desire following that, and where sometimes our women um, can plug into the behavioral aspect of sexual intimacy in order to connect more predictably with their spouses. And so having sex with an R is going to be different than having sex with an O or an E. And and understanding temperament can really help you personally understand how to navigate your own sexual desire and sexual feelings, how to engage well with your partner. And man, understanding the temperament of your partner is a game changer sexually, because temperament doesn't stop at the bedroom door, and
Right.
it bleeds over into every aspect of our lives because it is unchangeable, and it is constantly under the surface, behind the curtains, dictating how we why we do the things that we do. And uh, so predictably, um, temperament can show up in um, some of those different areas of and inner. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's really important to understand both gender and temperament, because those two things are really powerful and predictable components of sexual intimacy.
Right. They're super connected. Yeah, you are who you are, and those aspects of you always are going to be there. And so they're going to be at play, whether you recognize them and learn about them or whether you don't. You might find that you struggle a little less if you can educate yourself in those ways.
So let me just ask you one more question here, Charlotte. As an R, and you're an RE, you're a lot of both. And so personally and working with people, what are some things that you've become aware of in terms of R-ness, or E-ness, and gender as it shows up with sexual intimacy?
Yeah, well, there tends to be it's not as complicated for me sometimes. So I feel like I can pivot pretty quickly, and I know that's not always the case for women in general or for other temperaments. And it's true that I am female, so it does get a little bit you do get a little bit of the ball of yarn happening where there's so many aspects of life that kind of are like, well, do I feel like I have I had a chance to shower? Is he showered? Like, how are we doing with our reservoir? All these other things, the variables and things, and and frankly, women have hormones, so depending on the time of month, you might be having more or less of a desire to connect sexually. Particularly when you're ovulating, obviously your estrogen is going to be higher, so you're going to have an increased sexual desire typically. Um, but as a woman, I feel like at our woman, I should say, I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to shift gears and just jump into that and not struggle with it as much. It's not like I'm having to unravel the entire ball of yarn, which I feel like sometimes the emotionalness that might come with a C woman would be a lot more involved. And so I feel like that's something that our women have as a bit of a strength in a sense, when trying to connect sexually.
Yeah.
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 And those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Ours, are the most external processors of anybody. And there's less, there's less iceberg under the surface with an R. Most of the iceberg is above the surface, which is really nice. And so that of course shows up also sexually. And so it helps to being a female. And one of the things we'll talk about in another video on the gender differences will be female sexual desire in particular. But female sexual desire tends to be kind of complicated, and R-ness helps to decrease some of that complication, where C-ness and even E-ness can increase the complication. And so when you have femaleness and C-ness or E-ness, then it creates more complication. And when you have femaleness and R-ness or O-ness, it tends to reduce some of the complication inherent with that.
Yeah, and I didn't really touch on the E part at all, but yeah, I can see that's definitely true sometimes, where it feels like, well, things aren't quite lighting up the way I want them to. Ideally, I would want it to be XYZ, and I'm not seeing that happen. And it's feeling like I really don't know if I want to engage yet, or is there any way to improve this? Like, maybe not, maybe we just wait,
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, really good points. So thank you for your thoughts, and thank you guys for listening. And if you like the things that you're hearing, subscribe to the channel and stay with us to learn more about how to promote emotional connection through sexual intimacy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.